Welcome back everyone. In this video, I'm going to talk about more in depth about blending mode and the adjustment layer. As you can see here, we have a triangle relationship between layer mask, blending mode, and adjustment layer. And we already know how layer mask works. The layer mask is going to help us to decide which part of the image or where is the image that we are going to do adjustment, right? And the adjustment layer is actually helping us to decide what kind of adjustment we're going to do. Are we going to make it black and white? Are we going to make it more saturated color? Or are we going to make it more contrast? This is adjustment layers works. And how are we going to mix these adjustment layer when we working with images? So this is what the blending mode works. It's more like a mixer. How can we mix this adjustment layer to the existing images? So in order to fully control the post-processing process, we need to decide where are we going to do the adjustment, what kind of adjustment we need to do, and how are we going to mix all these adjustments with existing renders. So this is the entire relationship. Okay, let's keep going. Now you see we have blending modes, also we have adjustment layer. I already listed all the blending mode existing in the Photoshop and also all the adjustment layer inside Photoshop. Please pay attention. Combine different options together to do adjustments can be very overwhelming. The whole idea of this course is not trying to creating a library course to explain every single things inside Photoshop. I wanted to declutter all these overwhelmed information for beginners to understanding Photoshop if you came in from a Blender user background. In order to do this, I want all of you guys to focusing on as less as tool possible to just simply craft the main tools that I'm using pretty much every single time when using Photoshop. You really don't need to spend a whole lot of time to studying every single functions inside Photoshop in order to getting really good post-processing for your renders. So let's get started. For the blending mode, I'm just going to simply highlight all the important blending mode, which I believe these are only blending mode that you need to use. So I'm just going to highlight these. If I hold Z and drag, I'm going to zoom in. So as you can see here, we have quite a bit section here. Where did I find this blending mode? I'm basically just go to a layer or folder. You can see it's all in here. Okay, these are the blending mode. Okay, so that's how you decided how to mix each layers into the existing background. You can see here we have kind of breaking down into sections. So normal, dissolve or darken, and lighten, overlay, and differences and hue. So for my practice uses, these are the only ones you need to memorize, or you basically that's all you pretty much you need to use. With my years of experiences with as a photographer and retoucher, a lot of these things are not really essential and it's just give you overwhelming information. And how do I memorize all these modes? Photoshop already give you a hint to let you to memorize in the very easy way. So as you can see here, we have a section, right? It's called darken, multiply, blah, blah. All these names, it doesn't really matter. All the blending mode is trying to make everything darker. So that is this section was work for. And the next section is basically everything is just going to make a layer brighter. And it has a little bit different effect and feeling. So you don't really need to remember all that, but you just need to remember all these are very similar. Same thing on this section. It's going to make everything more contrasty. Okay, so it has a different effect, and the overlay and the soft light are just the two popular ones that we use very often. And for this part, I rarely use it. And for the very bottom part is talking about the color. Okay, so basically all you need to know is to remember multiply, screen, overlay, soft light, and this part. That's all the blending mode you are going to use through your rest of your career. And so that's pretty much it. And I'm going to go over some examples when I'm using all these blending mode because we're talking about the color down here. Well, for color, most of you guys already know that if you pick a RGB value, which means red, green, and blue, and combine them together, you can actually creating any colors in the RGB space. There's another way to determine a specific color is SV. This is what's called in the Blender, because inside Blender it's representing hue, saturation, and value. And inside of Photoshop, we don't call that. What we're calling here, we are calling here as hue, saturation, and brightness. So value and brightness literally means the same thing, right? And another way is we're going to have a hex number. And this is what we do is we're just going to type a number and to representing one specific number. Same thing here inside Photoshop. This is the hex number, okay? But in the Photoshop, we also have a lab color and the CMYK. These are the color space that specifically for printing. And if you're not really working with a printer, you don't need to understand too much about this. Then let's go back to here. So for hue, that's just only talking about the blending mode, to affecting the blending mode using the hue, which is the type of color. Okay, saturation, the pureness of the certain color, that's talking about saturation. In color, in this particular scenario, in this blending mode, it actually affecting both hue and saturation. This is what the color means, okay, inside Photoshop. And the luminosity is actually talking about the value, the brightness, and it's only affecting on that. So these are how it's separating or distinguish all these blending mode. Again, we are going to go through some examples very quickly, all right? So this is pretty much what I want to talk about for the blending mode. Let's move to the adjustment layer. Okay. So adjustment layer, as you can see here, we have a long list over here. Where can you find it? You can go here. You see, that's the entire list for the adjustment layer. Definitely for adjustment layer, it means what are we going to do with the adjustment. So we're gonna decide to adding more contrast. Are we going to adding more colors? And what are we going to make it black and white? So this is where we are going to decide what kind of adjustment we want to go. Again, these are the adjustment layers. You just need to memorize at the beginning and you should be ready to go. Okay, so the first thing is called solid color. It basically just one single solid color, period. That's how simple it is. The curves is actually, you see a lot of curves inside of Blender as well. You can adjust the contrast or shapes, everything accordingly. But in Photoshop, we're definitely just talking about the contrast and the brightness and color in the curve. Okay, and let's move on to the hue and saturation. This is talking about the colors and the color balance. You can do some manipulation about the highlight color or the shadow color and introduce some color cast in order to creating a different feeling and mood to enhance the rendered image you want to create. Of course, black and white. Layer adjustments is going to turn everything black and white. And the rest of these, to be honest with you, I really don't use a whole lot. And especially you're a Blender artist, a lot of stuff you can actually control inside Blender. You can simply just change your color inside Blender. You can change the materials inside Blender, the roughness, everything. You already did a lot of work inside Blender. Inside of Photoshop, the work is almost done. This is the very last 10% of work that you need to really craft the details getting the things done. So for Blender user or Blender artists like you, all these adjustment layer is way enough for what you want to achieve for good post-processing. Understanding all these adjustment layers, you pretty much can do anything inside of Photoshop when you're working with blending mode and a layer mask. Okay, so without talking too much, now let's spending some time to show you what all these adjustment layers does and also how to using blending mode with it. Okay, so first let's start with the adjustment layer. Let's go to down here, go to adjustment layer. I can just start with the solid color, right? That's what I want to use. I can click that. I can pick whatever color I want. Usually for my product renders, a lot of time I need to have a pure white background. So I basically just using a solid color. So I'm actually gonna put that in the back. And if I have some kind of PNG color stuff, I can just simply drop above that solid color, then you're ready to go. So this is what the solid color use. Another way to utilizing the solid color is you can just to pick the solid color in order to kind of extending the the image is a little bit long. For example, for this one, I know this image is very long. What you can do here, you can select these areas and just do a layer mask. And then, we are covering all that. If you hit Control I on your layer mask, you're going to reverse that. And what if your image is just like this? You don't have any pixels information in here, but for some purposes, you wanted to doing a poster or you want to adding some text, or anyway, you want some space of this. You can adding a solid color in the back, and then you can just choose one, pick on the edge. You can actually kind of blend in, right? You can getting some colors getting here. It's very convenient. It's better than nothing, right? And also you can actually using a layer mask to do some more adjustment accordingly. Since I already have a layer mask going here, I'm typically one adding another folder on the top of it and drag this thing in and adding another layer mask on this group. So I can just hit this one and hit G, and then I'm acting the gradient tool. And then I can just drag this gradients across the image. So you can see here, I got some gradients going on here. If you don't like this type of look, you can do different things with it. You can just hit Alt Z to kind of clear that. And then what you can do here, you can just hit B and grab brush and making sure your foreground color is going to be the black. You can hit X to reverse that. And then you can just draw something, kind of getting something transitioning a little bit better, right? So you can just spend some time to do so. So this is something that you can certainly do. And this is one way I use the solid color. It's just a solid single color, but you can really work that with your image. Then let's move on to the next one. We can go with the curve. As you can see here, we have brightness, contrast, levels, exposure. All these, again, the same thing. They're in the one single section. They pretty much means they are similar. What do we do? And personal preferences, just go with curve. Yeah, curve is the best. That's my strong opinion about it. So I can hit curve. And then as you can see here, we have a pop windows over here. So this will have a lot of information in here. As you can see here right now, it says RGB, which means I'm adjusting the curve to control red, green, blue channels, which means everything. So if I'm dragging the top areas, it's going to making everything brighter. And if I'm dragging that down here, the shadow areas is going to make it darker. It's more contrast. And the very typical look is going to be the S curve. It's adding the contrast. It's making the brighter part is brighter, and dark areas is going to be darker. If I'm going to toggle this eye icon, we can see the differences. So okay, the before, after. So you can see here we definitely bump a lot of contrast in there. But I don't like this type of contrast. So what we can do here, we can just kind of changing everything's a little bit minor, right? Just doesn't have to be a whole lot of contrast. We can just adding a little bit in here. So this is what we do. This is what we're going to do, which is the adjustment layer, and we're focusing on what. Okay, if you're going to have a layer mask, you can control certain areas to let Photoshop to know where this layer mask is going to work. Okay, this is the curve adjustment layer works. Another thing we can do here, we can even just go to each channel and we can adjusting the channel color accordingly. So right now you can see here I'm bumping the red color inside this image, go up. We can definitely do some different color grading inside here. So green channel, you can actually change the way its entire thing looks. And the blue, so for the curve, it's not just only adjusting the brightness, it's actually adjusting all the colors as well. And this is something certainly you can spend some time to play with it, but this is something I want to talk about. And another thing is you can actually using the point sample, you can see here, we can really control how much samples that we're going to use. Typically just 1 point sample. If I'm going to click here, and right now you can see here we got something going on the curve. We can decide is to make this brighter or lower according to that 1 point, right? This is another way you want to do. For example, if you feel like this P letter is a little bit too bright, click that and to drag it down. But please notice right now we're using the global adjustment, which means everything under this adjustment layer is going to turn dark. So this is where the layer mask is gonna shine. If you have a layer mask outline the P letter, then you should be able to just only working on this P letter color. So this is pretty much what the curve does, and a lot of time I don't mess with this too much. This is how you use the little hand. Another thing I want to just throw out there, it's not really necessary to correcting a color image with the color balance. Well, a lot of time we do that because we're photographers, and we need having a really good set of where is the white point, gray point, and the black point. As you can see here, we have 3 eyedroppers. So this one left here, if I move slowly to here, it says to sample image to set black point. So in order to have a really good color tone and range, we want to have the darkest point of this image and the midpoint of this image and really the brightest part of this image. So if I'm going to click this one and I'm going to finding the darkest part, I think this is the darkest part of the image, so I click that, and then I'm going to go to the white, which is the brightest part of the image. I believe this part should be the brightest one. Click that. So you can see here, it helps you to adjusting the color accordingly. And if I'm going to select the mid-tone, where you see this icon saying is setting the gray point. So I think this is going to be our mid-tone. So click that. I can just choosing a mid-tone. I think this is about the right. And then do this. The Photoshop curve adjustment layer is going to automatically calculate what should I think this color is need to be color corrected or white balance. So for Blender artists, you really don't need to do so. And since we have absolutely full control of the color inside Blender, this is kind of wasting your time to do this, and it's very risky. Sometimes it doesn't really generating good results. As you can see here, they're not. But I just want to quickly go over these tools inside of a curve adjustment layer. Again, you don't need to worry too much about this, and this is everything I want to talk about for the curve adjustment. And now let's move on to the next one. So after we're talking about the curve adjustment layer, and then we're going to talk about the hue and saturation. This is a very good one, and let's click that. Now you can see here we have another window pop out, and interestingly, this is working very similar. And the master is talking about all the color inside of the image. So again, think about all the color, which means we have 3 characters, right? Hue, saturation, and brightness, or you can call value or luminosity. So that's just a little bit fancier name for the brightness. But anyway, that's HSL, right? So we can change the hue, which means the kind of color. So we can switch things around. We can really changing each color according to this color spectrum. And the saturation, we can definitely bump all the saturation for each color according in this image. And the brightness, we can separate all these things together in here. And then you might see, well, what's the point of having this? Well, sometimes you just need to bump some tiny saturation, and with working with specific layer mask, you are adjusting a very small part accordingly. Okay. Another usage of this hue saturation adjustment layer is actually going down here. We have a very specific channel down here. Sometimes if you're really editing a photo that is a photograph, it's not really a render, and it has a lot of different color noises. It's not that pure color. So sometimes you just want to get rid of the color that you don't want, and this is something you can use for the hue saturation. For example, if this color is not pure enough, it has some red color inside, and let me examine that. Let me drag the saturation to see. Yeah, we have some red color in here, right? We have some of this, and what we can do here, we can desaturate it, get rid of it. Does it really matter to you? Or we can just reduce the saturation to make the eyes looks a little bit better, to organize all the colors inside the image. So this is one way you can do, and a lot of time the real estate photographer usually using this kind of method to reduce a lot of color cast inside the room to get rid of all these nasty colors, and then in order to get a really nice and clean walls inside the rooms and make it look wider and clean. So that's just another small tips on how photographers use all these adjustment layers when they're retouching their images. But this is pretty much you want to know. Okay, now let's keep going. Let's go to the color balance. Click that. Now we have a beautiful property windows pop out again. So as you can see here, we have some drop down menu, which is says tone. So we have shadow, highlight, mid-tone. It actually separating these images into 3 major areas based on the brightness, right? So what we can do here, the color balance. What we're trying to do is we're trying to balance the color according to which section of the brightness of this image. Okay, so for mid-tone right now, we can basically control what the mid-tone color looks like. The mid-tone was covering the majority of the image. If I'm dragging to the red part, it's going to generating some red color. So you can really changing the color according to the way that you want to go for the mid-tone. If I'm going to change this to the highlight, remember the highlight is in these areas. I can actually getting some hint of color into the highlight area. This is what the color balance is used for, because it's trying to color grading a certain areas. Okay, so I'm just kind of getting some little bit blue in the highlight areas. So this is how it works. So if I'm dragging to the yellow, you can see here that's affecting there. Although it's still affecting some part of images, it's simply because it just kind of like is mathematically to calculating the entire image based on data. It is not going to generating a full control about the gradients. Usually the gradient is the hardest part to really do an adjustment layer. And as you can see here, we have tiny down here, we have preserve luminosity. So again, this term is basically telling you we're trying to preserve the brightness of this color of this image. We only going to adjusting the color of it. Okay, if this sounds a little bit confused to you, let me say it again. So we have hue, saturation, and the luminosity. So this is telling you the luminosity of this image is not going to change. We're only going to change the color of this image. Okay, make sense? Okay, so this is what a color balance works. You can use this color balance adjustment layer to control the specific tone of this image. All right, let's keep going. Let's go to the black and white. This is very simple to remember and use. Just click that. Everything is going to turn in black and white. And then you may say, well, what's the point of that since it's already black and white? So another thing we can do here, because we converting everything into black and white, but we still have some control over it. Remember, before we're adding this black and white adjustment layer, we still have some color previously existing. So the majority of the image is blue color. If I'm adjusting the blue color, we can adjusting the overall brightness in this image. So watch. So you can see here, I'm actually can make this a little bit more brighter. Remember the PS letters are very close to the cyan, so I can just drag in that, can changing the velocity of this black and white. So you basically still have quite a bit of control when you converting a color image to a black and white, so you can just fully control the contrast of it. It's going to help you to generating really good contrasty beautiful tone black and white images using this black and white adjustment layer. Okay, so this is pretty much everything you need to know for the black and white adjustment layer. Another thing I use very rarely, but it seems like getting very popular among the photography community, is going to the adjustment layer for the color lookup. It's basically it's loading a LUT. So what is LUT means? It's a lookup table. So it's having certain color profile that you can load it into. You can just kind of getting some very quick look on color result, and see that these are some film color palettes. You can just do that. You see everything is going to change, so you can really do a play around to find the one you like. If you like some film color feelings, you can certainly go with that, Kodak, stuff like that. But for me, I'm a digital artist. I'm not a fan of the film looking, and throughout my works, and also you see my sense of style, I just don't like the old school film color vibes for my images. That's why I never use it. But if you do, you want to try something different, you can certainly use this color lookup adjustment layer for your editing. So we have talked about everything about adjustment layer, pretty much done. Okay, now let's quickly go over the blending mode. And since we already talked about the adjustment layer, for the blending mode, I'm just going to using a very quick gradients and squares to demonstrating different blending mode works inside of Photoshop. And if I'm clicking this layer, you see we have some blending mode to be able to choose. The best way when I started learning Photoshop about the blending mode, I'm actually just keep trying different feeling, because what we can do here, we can just using a very neat shortcut, and you can left click and click again. Now this bars has been highlighted in blue, right? What you're gonna do, you're gonna hit Control and the right arrow key, and on your keyboard it can just toggle different blending mode. You can see here, this is very interesting. Now it's in the lighten section, so everything is primarily showing the brighter part, and it's kind of blending the dark part inside the image. So you see this is screen, and we have different blending effect. And then now we're going to the overlay, which means it's increasing the contrast. All right, soft light a little bit different, because overlay is going to increasing the contrast and make images look more punchy. Okay, that's just how they feel. Then you can just keep toggle things on and try different things. So this is not really a good way to show you how blending mode works. In the later case study sections, I will go over some actual usage while using the blending mode to doing some really cool minor adjustment on my image render. As you may notice, blending modes does not seem to be the very powerful tools for editing images, and for that triangle, it's not really playing very important roles compared to the layer mask and adjustment layer. However, the blending mode is going to do some really minor magic when we're dealing with some specific editings, which I will show you in the case study section to let you know why this blending mode is so magical. Okay, this is everything I want to share in this video, and I will see you in the next one.